Hello, everybody. This is Brad Dyke reaching out to you. And today, I thought I would take a moment here and talk about something that many of you have seen or heard me talk to, known as native storage. Native storage basically is a form of communication that exists that's been pretty common for our IT industry for roughly about 15 years. And way in the day, when we had RLL drives and MFM drive controllers, we had to bring in devices as static devices. Now, the bad news about that way of doing capacity planning is, number one, you're only dealing with like 25 megs of capacity on the hard drives. And, such things as this high performance platform you see here, which is basically a IO Fusion 160 gig internal PCIe card, which is indicated right here, to what's called burst card cache, which is also a form of hard drive's capacity, versus the SSD traditional, and believe it or not, we call that traditional these days, opposed to the old days of the 3.5 or the 5-inch drives that were much bigger, by the way. They don't exist anymore, nor are they made anymore, to the ultra-high fast drive capacities. Now, what does it mean when you say native storage? Well, basically what native storage is, you take the communication that hard drives post about 4 things. 1, their state. 2, their starting point. 3, their end point. And 4, the health of the sector interleave. In other words, its own ability to diagnose. Now, on these systems, on the circuit cards themselves, are controller chips. And these have EEPROMs in them, or basically places to install software on that can allow that to house the software and take full advantage of all 4 requirements at the hardware level. This is important because when you have a RAID controller that is set to hardware level, you have everything on your system communicating on the premise of an EEPROM hardware configuration. Now, when you're dealing with a RAID controller card, such as this device here, with its onboard cache for burst cache communication, and also you have an Hba controller, you have to understand the differences between these two devices to the devices such as hard drives, SSDs, and onboard PCIe standard memory cards, that native state communication is exclusively isolated on the EEPROM configuration of the chipset of the RAID controller. It's using all of its communication, stack, and diagnostics at the same level as the physical hard drives or any other form of storage, because they talk on a raw device capacity mode, or what we call raw device drives, RDMs. And RDMs are basically the premise of raw device mapping aspects that give you a series of command lines at which you can execute. Can you do these command lines with NFS or CIF share resource drives that you create on your systems? No, because they don't have the capacity to initiate capacity formatting, sector interleave settings, values, resets, diagnostic modes, and so on, unlike a RAID controller, which can. Now, beside the RAID controller here, you also have a traditional style Hba controller card. Now, an Hba controller card does, to a level, communicate at the raw device mapping level. In other words, it has the ability of instructing command lines, such as formatting and so on, to the devices to allow them to be functional accessible. But they don't carry the RAID adaptive communications. Yes, I said RAID in a redundant array of inexpensive hard disks. They don't carry the extended disk diagnostic states as premised as you would see with the software-loaded EEPROM RAID controllers. Now, what does that mean? Well, in a nutshell, both of these controllers require software. The difference is, for a RAID controller, it's self-contained on the EEPROM chips themselves. That's what the software is, and it communicates at a very low level on the motherboard. This is a native state. The Hba controller does do some basic control communication basing, and it's great for segmenting traffic, but it doesn't do the rest. You have to go out, find the software for it, and load it on an operating system, and this is a major component that is missing from the RAID controller that the Hba has to deal with. Yes, it's a very capable and functional card, and yes, it will connect many disk drives together, and that's its advantage. But to get in there and record the log recordings of the diagnostic processes and so on, and self-repair and self-diagnosing for performance level treat and so on, no. If you put recycled hard drives on a RAID controller, it will go through the process to see if that set of hard drives will actually work, function, and which ones are going out the door. And they'll actually say, hey, you know what? This is not spinning up fast enough. This has got sector interleave errors. This has got CRC reporting call errors, and so on and so on and so on. This guy, he'll just take whatever you get, and he'll run it until the drive itself posts a point failure. Then at that point stage, if you've got the proper software loaded on your Linux platform, or you're passing this through a Microsoft Windows program, you have to make sure that the missing software here is loaded in your onboard operating system for here. Then this can function a lot more like the RAID controller. Now, why is the Hba so valuable? Well, it's not a strong native communication-based controller card, but its device independence is high. It can run as high as the RAID controller, but not as expensive. The only reason why it's not expensive because of the lack of the software, so you can basically not configure pools or volume sets or RAID groups on this guy right here, but you can on here without an operating system. Here it has to be built all on a premise like FreeNAS or TrueNAS or Linux BSD with the loaded software controller plugins and so on and so on. That allows you to be able to get some of the functionality you see here, but you're treating the devices on software configuration RAID or pooling, disk pooling for this to work. So I always gravitate to the RAID controllers because I can actually make them act like HBAs, but I still have all the advantages of the onboard software. But compatibility will always be a challenge over time, where the Hba controller does not have a compatibility software level on its extended features because there are none there present to be there in the beginning. But the key detail about the Hba value, which gives it great value, is its cost, its ability to daisy chain out in single and dual pathway, and its ability to basically work with many software, both in development, freeware, and localized software such as Microsoft and or TrueNAS, which are paid services. So if I have a choice, I still gravitate to the RAID controllers. Even if I set up all the disks as RAID zeros, individual RAID 0 configurations, I still like the RAID controller. It's native communication, diagnostics, the pre's and the posts, all the things that I don't have to worry about. They happen on this card, and then they communicate their report logs to you in your operating system, and you're great. You can sit and develop, not take care of a bunch of devices. Hba controller, really a great card to play with, to work with, to design your freestanding NAS chassis where you can build your do-it-yourself NAS platforms. Great configuration, a lot of free software for it, has a lot of volatility to it, but also a lot of fun and a lot of enjoyment in it as well. So that's it for me. I hope this helps you guys understand when I say the term native storage and how it communicates. You understand what that is. Good day.